Angel Whitewolf, The Dark Enlightened One. Chapter 5. But being a rebel isn't the same thing as being dark.
Well, no, but it's a dark characteristic. You can have characteristics without being that.
That's quite true.
Simply, nobody was more of a rebel than Jesus. He went face to face with the Roman Empire. He rebelled against death itself. Now that's being a rebel.
But he wasn't dark.
Many said he was, to the degree that they condemned him to death. Many still say he was.
And what do you say?
I say I need to go have coffee with him so I could ask him. And if I could invite him to go have coffee, and he said, let's go get a beer instead, then I would have my answer.
Going to down a beer with Jesus. That sounds like something I'd like to do.
Without a doubt. Hey, after all, his first famous miracle was turning water into wine the minute the booze ran out at a party, right?
Well, yeah, it sounds like something my best friend would do if he became enlightened. He'd go to a party, and the minute they ran out of beer, he'd turn water into wine.
He'd turn it into more beer. The thing is, even if Jesus was a mega rebel, no one doubts his most outstanding characteristic was being a martyr.
All Christianity is based on the idea that Jesus gave his life for us.
That's right. But in these times, it's no longer guilt or fear that humanity wants to use to evolve. No, what we want now is simply freedom.
Freedom!
Freedom, that's right. So that's where I fit in. That's where you fit in. A dark being has become enlightened, simply because he knows who he is. He can see himself and recognize himself as such, but mainly he can accept and love himself for it. And thanks to that, he can use his darkness wisely.
You know, after everything we've talked about, I almost believe you could be an enlightened one. But the main thing is that I'm starting to have trouble seeing you as a dark being.
That's only because you are starting to see me as someone good, and you're still confusing light with goodness and darkness with evil.
I suppose.
But let me make it very clear to you. I am a dark creature. Deep abysses extend all along my soul, enormous and black as the most cruel cold night. Terrifying infernal shadows that don't allow you to even imagine what horrible things happen in there protect them. They are endless abysses, where the most vile creatures could cover themselves. It is undoubtedly what all humanity's nightmares are made of. However, humanity only has nightmares about these abysses because they don't know them. They fear them. They seem so deep and black, so threatening, that they have never gone into them to see what is really there. I decided to throw myself into the dark abysses of my soul. I went in fully. I let the blackness swallow me, and do you know what I found?
What? What did you find?
Peace.
Peace?
Peace. All the peace that this strident world blinded by light didn't allow me to see. If one is afraid and is surrounded by darkness, he starts to imagine every kind of terrifying thing. But if one is no longer afraid, darkness is the most relaxing thing there can be. In the abysses of the soul, you only need the smallest spark of light to see everything clearly, while outside there is so much light that the details get lost and are ignored. Let me tell you that absolute light leaves us as blind as absolute darkness.
That's very true.
I went into the abysses, and I discovered there were no monsters in there, but uncountable treasures
treasures that I could now see with the finest ray of light. Then light is necessary.
As necessary as darkness. It's a mistake to deny either of them.
They complement each other. They are necessary so we can see. We cannot see ourselves in the absence of light, nor in the absence of darkness.
Imagine you're looking at a painting. To see it, you need light and darkness at the same time. There have to be darker parts and more luminous parts. Otherwise, you won't be able to see anything. Too much darkness, and it would be difficult or impossible to see the painting. Too much light, and you couldn't see it, or you would be so blinded that you wouldn't even notice it was there. People go through the world fearing those who are dark. You know, we are all like paintings. We have light and darkness, and together they reveal our true and only beauty. I have more darkness than luminosity. In other words, my painting has more dark spots, but that doesn't make it less beautiful. It doesn't make it less good. I find much more reverence for the universe, much more inspiration to love, much more deepness in a painting of a vast starry sky than in one that represents the fires of hell. A starry sky is almost pure darkness, with barely a little light that makes sense of it. The fires of hell are almost all light, with just a small touch of darkness that defines them. If you ask me, I find it easier to see God in the starry sky than in the fires of hell, and using this analogy, I tell you with complete certainty that darkness is not bad. It's beautiful, it's sacred, and it complements light.
That's beautiful.
It is. Darkness is beautiful. It invites you to look within.
And why does it scare us so much? I mean, I know the ancestral reasons, but why do we still fear it today?
Because we know that in darkness we will feel like turning toward ourselves, and almost everyone fears that.
And why fear what can give us the biggest power?
Because there have been too many people who have told us that we can get lost, which isn't true.
Why do they say it?
Because of fear. They are afraid to try it even though they want to. And they are even more afraid that someone else will do it and they'll have to admit that they didn't have the courage. So it's easier to make others afraid so they don't have to do what they themselves fear. Once more, the old tool of repression. But we can't blame them.
Why not? Bunch of imbeciles, of course we can.
Okay, I agree with you. They are completely to blame. But we couldn't ask them to do otherwise. Do you know why?
Nope.
Because humanity as a species was in its childhood. It's obvious that a child is afraid of the dark and believes all kinds of stories. What's more, on many occasions these stories are necessary because a child doesn't have the capacity to understand things yet.
For example, when a very small child asks his father, where do babies come from?
Exactly. The father could show him a porn film and tell him the truth, but the fact is that the child still isn't able to understand it, so he tells him a symbolic story.
Like that babies are brought by this torque.
Well, yes, although that one is pretty stupid. I would tell him something more creative, something like he was in heaven, and when his soul decided to come here, he turned into a child.
And isn't that what happens?
Well, yes, something very like that, but I'm omitting the explanation of the physical transactions.
I understand.
The case is that humanity couldn't understand many things before because, as a species, they were little children, and a series of stories helped them to clarify their doubts.
Stories like religions.
Stories like many sects, like many political speeches, like a good part of morality or of social norms, and like many parts of a lot of religions, yes. We can't generalize because we would almost certainly make mistakes.
So, humanity was looking around the edges of its own darkness, but since it didn't know how to use it,
it used to get hurt when it got near to it. That's right. And since it got hurt, it developed several stories where it said that the boogeyman would come out if someone went too deeply into the abysses of their soul. This kept, well, kind of, most people under control, throughout forbiddance, repression, and fear. It was an effective tool, but we have grown as a species.
Are we no longer children?
Using that analogy, no. Humanity has entered adolescence, and we all know that adolescence can be defined with one word: rebellion.
It can also be defined by others, like problems, hormones, instability, uncontrollable desires, boiling emotions.
Yes. Doesn't it seem like a good way of describing what's happening in the world at this time? Humanity as a species that is fully entering its adolescence.
Now will you talk about it like you promised?
Precisely. But first, we'll take a break, because those cookies you want so much aren't going to come upstairs by themselves, so you'll have to go down to the kitchen to get them.
How do you know I want cookies?
You really like to pretend that you don't know, don't you?
Okay, I'll stop bothering you. Of course you know because you are an enlightened one. I'll go get the cookies. My arteries are starting to soften up.